G'day everyone and welcome to Rob's blasting shed today. Had a few requests about my little sandblaster outfit, so I thought I'd just share a bit with you. I actually run the Garnet through quite a few times, and this stuff here is reaching the point where I've got to introduce some new material to it. It's getting quite fine and it's getting quite contaminated with a lot of paint dust and things like that, rust material and things as well. But that's how I use it. I tend to use it until it powders up, it blows straight out the door when it gets too fine, and I just introduce new material into it all the time. Now, here's my little blasting pot, and if you look closely, you might notice that it started out in a former life as an LPG or a propane cylinder. Now, I made this a long time ago, so I'm thinking 1993, 1994. And back then, these little pressure pot blasters were actually coming onto the market. But like things back then, China hadn't sort of entered the forum, and these sorts of things were quite expensive for what they were. One day I was tipping my rubbish out at the local rubbish tip and spotted this cylinder laying there, and I thought, you know, no one else has realised its true potential. So I took it home, and I was pretty wary of it for a while. I took the bungs out and things and just left it air out for a while. And then I sort of bit the bullet one day and decided, okay, if we're going to do this, we'll make it happen. So I designed it, sort of copied off what was available at the time to a degree. But the air goes into the pressure pot in here, and it's got a pipe that's sort of bent to a right angle. And then it's got another piece of pipe on top of it with a piston on the top of it, which comes up with the air pressure to seal the top of the cylinder, but I'll get back to that. It works basically on, the air goes in here, this is just the on-off tap there, and I've put taps in here just mainly if I needed to clear a block line or something like that, because with sand in there all the time it does tend to sort of bog down occasionally, and you've got to be able to shift where the pressure is. And at the bottom of it, see if we can get an angle on that, we've got what was where the tap on the original cylinder was, and I've just got basically a ball valve there. Now that's been on there since day one. It's pretty worn out, and when it's blasting it needs to be set at about there, but that will regulate the flow of garnet down into here, and the air basically comes straight through off here and blows straight past the bottom and picks up the garnet that's falling down and pushes it out into the feed hose. Now I've got a 1/2 inch feed hose, and it's just a piece of water hose, but it's actually reinforced hose, so it's fairly stiff. It's getting very worn out now, but what tends to happen is it wears out the piece just straight past this fitting down the bottom. Now everything wears. These fittings down here wear. This one where the hose joins into that T-piece at the bottom, that's forever wearing out. So I buy those in bulk, and when they wear through and start blasting out, I replace those. The same thing, it's the same fitting on this end here, that wears out regularly. This tap doesn't last long. I get a few months out of them at best, and then they just eat through. On the end I've got a tungsten carbide tip, and that's a pretty expensive piece of kit. Now it's got a 3/16 hole or 4mm hole in it, but looking at it, it's heading for 5mm now, so that one's getting worn out as well. And I've just made an adapter up to screw it onto this ball tap here, and that's just a 3/4 ball tap, so that's pretty simple. I've got a safety valve on it, and that's set for around £90 per square inch. And with the air line that I'm running, on the distance I'm running and the amount of compressed air I've got, I've never had that blow off. So naturally when you're blasting, it's just running at full flow to what it gets to. And I'd say we're running at around 80, 85 pound. And I've got a little pressure regulator on here. And if I'm doing aluminium mag wheels or something like that, where they've got that rough cast look in the centres of some of them, I can wind the pressure down a bit here, and I can drop it down to 40 or 50 pound per square inch, and that works well too. And after many years of sort of feeding the sand in through the hole in the top, I added the funnel onto it. But I'll get back to the original experience of welding it. I was actually fairly wary of it because it's had a combustible substance in it. And so the first job was to weld this piece of pipe in the side of it. So I did actually fill it with carbon dioxide so it reduce any risk of explosion. And I got that one welded in all right. but you do get a pretty strong smell of gas when you're welding it. So naturally the porosity of the metal has got some trapped up stuff in there, so you do run the risk of it exploding. Now, I do not recommend people go and make these. Pressure vessels are a bit of a scientific thing, and people have been killed with homemade pressure tanks, so just be wary of that. And today, China's out there, and these things are just so inexpensive that if you wanted one, you just go and buy one of those and use it until it died and bought another one. All this stuff I've added on here was just welded on the outside, the legs and things like that. There was no dramas there. But I made a ring to go into the top of it. And once again, being a bit wary of cutting a hole into an LPG cylinder, I actually got there with the drill and drilled a whole heap of series of holes around there, knocked that out, and then I ground the opening out to fit the flange in that I'd made, and then good heavy ring of weld. But I filled the pot up with water just under the top to displace any air in there when I welded that on there, and there was no dramas, it just welded up all right. So that's been my little blasting pot all these years. And I'll take you over and I'll show you what we're feeding it with the compressors, because that's the big secret. You've just got to have a massive volume of air to make these things work really well. And for a long time I just didn't have that. But these days we're set up pretty well and it all works good. So this is where the air comes from. I've got this big hydrovane compressor. Now, I'm not sure exactly how big it is. I'll have to go and look in the book to see, but this one is in cubic meters per minute, not cubic feet per minute. So it's a good size compressor. And I use this one for pretty much all of my day-to-day work, the stuff in the spray booth and things like this. But this is big enough to run that sandblaster all by itself and a few hand tools as well. But I've also got way in the back a big piston compressor, which was also big enough to run the sandblaster plus a few other hand tools as well at the same time. So I can hook them together. I've just got taps separating them out, and when I'm blasting these days I do actually run both of the compressors together, and because I'm breathing the air that's being compressed by these machines, they're both set up for food grade air. It's got a couple of flashing lights over here, and that's because it's a little bit unhappy with me because I haven't serviced it yet. It's got the little picture of the spanner up in the corner, but it can wait a little while. I'll get to that. I'll give it an oil change and a new filter and it'll be a happy machine again. So here's our big piston compressor. I'm just about to fire this one up and then we'll get out of here because it's pretty noisy. But like I say, she's a big sucker and it'll pump a heap of air. So this is our compressed air line where it comes into the main workshop, and it feeds firstly into this big receiver. Now this is an old tank that came off one of those old single post hoists where they used compressed air to push the oil level down in the tank to raise the hoist up in the workshop. And in the 1980s there were plenty of these hoists around that had been decommissioned, and these tanks were kicking around everywhere. And I bought this one off a friend of mine who had a workshop in Bunbury for $50 I think at the time, but it's been really good because where you got the compressed air coming in on the hose, it goes into this first expansion chamber. I get quite a lot of the moisture out of the air just in this receiver alone. From there it goes into this air dryer. Now this has got a heap of silica gel inside it, which we know is very good for sucking moisture out of air, and that's the secondary stage. From there, I go to my other pressure regulators in the shed, and past this point, I've never had a water trap that's ever had water in it. And right down, I've got 3 of them inside the spray booth, and none of those have ever had any moisture in them. So my air from this point on is very dry. This is our line here that goes out to the sandblasting shed, and it's only a 1/2 inch line. So I do lose a bit of volume there, but the blaster works really well on it. So I've got probably nearly 100 metres of 1/2 inch hose to get from here to the sandblasting shed, and like I say, that will run full bore with that nozzle on there, and I'm still running it around 80-85 pound per square inch at the nozzle, so that's pretty good for what I do. So this is our new Garnet in here. Now this one is called Premium Blast from GMA, Now this is the stuff that all the big boys use for doing big structures and things like that, steel beams, the whole lot, and it is a bit too coarse for what we use it for here. But once it's been through the machine, it powders, it breaks up, so it comes back down to being a better size, and that's why I just introduce it into the pot rather than putting a full dose of this in there. If I was doing a gnarly piece of steel, I could do a whole pot full of this and it would work better. But I used to get one called new steel, which was basically the next size down to this. And pretty much this, once it's been used once, becomes new steel, which works really well. But it's become a bit hard to get lately, so I went with the bigger stuff, and this is doing the job nicely now. But it's good stuff. It's good to feel. It's almost slippery in your hands. It just sort of flows and things like that, which is what you need inside a pot, because as soon as the stuff will sit somewhere and not flow, it stops feeding at the bottom of the pot. So that pretty much all runs off my hands just by tipping my hand over. So just yummy stuff. So this is our breathing pot. This will be an activated charcoal filter that just takes the last lot of contaminants out of it before it's safe to breathe. And I've got a food grade hose that plugs in here to feed my helmet. So I'll connect that up and get a bit of air through, and we'll blast a few bits and pieces. Welcome to the real Rob shed. It's a bit agricultural from the outside. So this one's my breathing hose. I've got to get all the kinks out of this one because I don't want it to fold over when I'm moving around in the shed. So I tend to run it out in a straight line and then come back over to the shed with it. Well, I'll go and suit up and we'll find some things to blast, the fun bit. PPE, Rob. I just wear these hazmat overalls for this sort of work. Because they're baggy, the blast back that you get on you just moves them around, and I'll get a few jobs through these before they start eroding through, and then it's time for a new one. And this pair's done a bit, and the sleeves and things are starting to get a bit thin, but there's a couple more blast jobs in this set yet. Hearing protection, very important, because this stuff is loud. Even through the helmet that I wear, you do get a lot of noise coming through. And the helmet's pretty cool. This one's the old Nova 2000, which has been kicking around for a lot of years. And when I bought this, a 3000 was on the market, but they were discounting these old 2000s to get rid of them. And I thought, well, they've been around for decades and they're a damn good helmet. So parts will be around for a while, and there's a lot of non-genuine stuff for them as well. So air feeds in through there, feeds up there, and you can actually control the temperature of the air a little bit. So if it's a cold day, you can warm it up a little bit by adjusting the knob on the bottom. If it's a hot day, you can cool it down a bit, but it's still not like air conditioning. You're going to get hot on a steamy day. And the other problem that you do get is that because you're breathing dry compressed air, is you dehydrate. So I have a big glass of water before I get into it, and I have a big glass as soon as I get out of it. Now the helmet's also got these tear-off lenses on it. So when they get a bit blasted up on the front, you can tear them off on the fly, and then you can see again. And I put 6 or 7 of those in at a time, and then as I'm blasting away, I can just keep tearing them off and keep seeing what I can see, because naturally the bounce back garnet's just going to rip into this as well, like it does with everything else. Now this high-tech arrangement here is the patented Rob Shed sandblasting items holding a fixture. And it's starting to fail, like it's letting me down a bit. It's actually blasted through down here, and my dad gave me this. It was quite a reasonable chair at the time. There was a pair of them, but the other one split in one of the wires, so I wasn't brave enough to actually sit on it, and I thought, I know what this will be good for. It'll be good for blasting. And it's just the shot for little bits and pieces that you want to blast, because the backrest stops them blowing away. And that's another problem, is as soon as you put something small in front of a blaster, because of the volume of air and the pressure, it wants to take off at 1,000,000 miles an hour and get away from you. So once I invented this special fixture, it solved a lot of problems with the process.
It's just a matter of getting the amount of sand to the airflow regulated. And that tap's pretty worn out these days, so sometimes you'll hit it and it'll be out. So we've got a bit too much now. So she's hitting it pretty hard. Just lean that off a little bit. It's nice and hungry at the moment. It's ripping right into that rust. I've said this before, it actually shatters it and breaks it up when it hits it. The paint shatters and rust shatters, comes off. But it is billions of little tiny hammers hitting the surface, so that's why you run the risk of distorting sheet metal with it. And once again, a big sandblaster can do some damage, but there's good operators out there. You can find someone that's got a reputation for doing car stuff and not someone who just spends all day, every day blasting big steel structures. You can get nice blasting done. And from here, this is ready to paint. So what I'll do next is just blow all the dust off, hang them up in the booth and just hit them with some weld-through primer. And they're ready to go back on the car once the paint dries. Look at that. There's a few jagged edges on here where I took them off the car. This area goes around the back wheel arch inside the back of the body, and it had a MIG weld on there, a couple of spots of MIG weld, so I've just split it underneath it and I'll just weld that back together with the MIG when it goes back in. New piece I put on the bottom. So that's sort of the upright face, it fits in the car like that. So this will be the right hand side, the back right hand back wheels in here. And this is the original opposite to the other side one I blasted a minute ago. I think he's okay. I'll just blast him up and need a little bit of panel beating to get it back to the right shape because it's got chiselled out of the car, but it's not actually rusted through anywhere. So that one, oh, yeah, look at that, there's a rust hole. Maybe we will make a new one, but anyway, I'll blast him and we'll make a decision later on. If nothing else, it'll make a good pattern. Where you got rust pits and rust into the pits, it takes a bit more blasting and hitting it from a few different angles to get rid of it all. That's where, if you're doing this yourself, you can put the care into getting it just right, but when you farm it out to other people, quite often they'll just have hit it from one direction and there'll be a shadow of rust when you look at it from the other direction, which is the stuff that can start growing again. And let's face it, if it's got rusty pitted metal, it's an area that does go rusty. Bit of a moisture trap in the car. The sealants are a bit harder thing to shift because they absorb the impact. Normally I would scrape them all off. I just grabbed this stuff out as a bit of material for a demonstration today and didn't take a lot of notice, but it is eroding away. And being in a corner like that, it's not a huge risk to this panel from blasting, but if it was in a big flat area, we'd be running more of a risk of getting the metal hot and distorting it. Give it a hit on that side. That's good stuff. There's an edge there that I've missed. Bit of paint along there. And this is a piece that supports the floor in the back of the car. Now that's silicon sealant that's been put into it. don't think we're going to get that. No, it's just going to bounce off it. Oh, it's slow. It is moving it. Look at that. Got it on the run. Fairly heavy piece of metal, so once again, not a real risk, and we're between two folds. It's not like we're working a big flat area with it. And got him. That stuff I really should have scraped. You can see how much time it takes to sit there and slowly wear this stuff away. Bit of a scrape first, or a wire wheel or something to get it all off easily and quickly. And once again, if you're taking stuff to a blaster, they're going to be charging you by the hour for the job. So the easier it is and quicker it is for them to get through it, the cheaper it's going to be for you. One of these panels, I'm not sure if I'm going to use this or not. It's got some big pits back here. A couple of them might even go through. It might even be a case of cutting it off through here, making a new back section for it. One of those things, it's easy to make long runs rather than short runs. So 6 of one, half a dozen other, it might be just as easy to make a whole new panel. This recessed hole at the top where the drain tube goes through to let the water out of the back of the car, run underneath the car. These Holden utes are built on the same floor pan as what the sedans and wagons are. There's even the provision in there for the back seat to clip into underneath the floor for the back of the utility. And they only had a wooden plywood floor, and it sits into this recess, and so they were never sealed in very well from factory, so it was a bit of a joke putting the drain tubes in there because the water just ran through this floor pan underneath. And even though they had a couple of drain holes, they'd quite often fill up with dust in that area and they'd start rusting. So they had a bit of a bad name for rust, just from that aspect that they had the 2 layers of floor in the back of the car. Thinking we might be making a new one of these. Now the sand stopped flowing through, the pot could be empty, but just shutting the air off and bringing it back on is often enough to get it flowing again. But I'm thinking the pot's nearly empty. I've had it running a bit rich where I normally would do. Just giving it a shake, we're out of sand in the pot. So I may have to refill the pot and finish this bit later. The used stuff I'll screen just to make sure there's no lumps and bumps in there that'll block off the nozzle. A few rocks and bits and pieces in there, so these sorts of things that stop it from working. Okay, that'll be enough to finish this job up anyway. That's that pop-up valve. It will lift. Not too much dirt in it, but pops up. Out there. Okay guys, so there's a bit on the sandblaster. Hope you've enjoyed it. It's just pretty basic stuff, but at least you get a little bit of an insight on how it all works and what it does and how it comes up. So I'm Rob Teal. Thanks for watching.